Okay, as I say, good morning and welcome to 2023 BCarm Academy. This session is on risk assessment. My name is Mark Hutchinson. I'm the risk engineer, safety consultant for BCarm, and I'll be delivering this morning's bite-sized chunk just to raise awareness or to help you think about and understand the risk assessment process. On the webinar this morning, there are many different clients, so hopefully you'll get some key points and summaries that you might be able to use in your working life, whether it be that you're actually carrying out risk assessments in the workplace, or whether you're looking to support maybe your clients along the risk assessment route. So let's lift the bonnet and have a look underneath and see where we go to. Before I start, I just want to sort of give you sort of my version of how I interpret health and safety legislation within the United Kingdom. And the illustration on the screen at the moment, I tend to look at the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 and the sort of the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. I try to visualize those as the framework of an umbrella, if you would. And on each of the spokes of the umbrella, there are many different pieces of legislation. Just a few examples are given here. So construction design and management, noise, provision and use of work equipment, control of substances hazardous to health, display screen equipment, asbestos, fire, Legionella, first aid, manual handling, etc. So that's how I visualize the way that the legislation and the laws are structured. And each piece of or each of those legislation, those laws, if you would, require us to carry out a risk assessment in some form or another. So there's a big onus on us to try and carry out all these risk assessments, not only just to comply with law. You know, I think there's the net is slightly wider than that. You know, from a safety management point of view, why do we manage safety? Why do we carry out risk assessments? Well, obviously, I think we have a moral obligation to make sure that people are safe, that they turn up to work and that they go home in exactly the same condition. Obviously, on the screen we've got the legal bit, the compliance with legislation, and also there's maybe a financial aspect to managing safety. There are many different financial benefits in terms of managing your processes, your tasks, your equipment, the activities that you carry out within your business, and also trying to make those as profitable and as safe as you can, but also to sort of stop or limit any accidents and injuries that might result in sort of employees' liability claims. So what is a risk assessment? Well, I see a risk assessment as a sort of a careful examination of anything in the workplace that could cause injury or ill health. And then we've got to think about, well, who can be harmed by those activities, the use of certain equipment and tools that we have, or the processes that we carry out. So not only is it aimed at sort of our workforce, our employees, our staff. It might be agency staff that come in to help you and support you carry out those tasks. It might be contractors or visitors that are coming onto your site, or it might even be that there's an interaction with the general public. So again, we've got to consider, you know, all the different people that might be harmed by our activities. And then we've got to also think about if something does go wrong, what are the consequences? How big and how severe are those consequences are going to impact on an individual or a group of people? And once we've sort of started to consider and think about those and the risks that are involved, then we can think about, well, how can we control these? What do we need to do what are our actions and recommendations that we need to put in place to obviously reduce the risk and to try and eliminate it as far as possible. So on our risk assessment journey, if you would, I think, how do I approach risk assessment? When I go out to visit clients, I think there's the two questions that first spring to my mind, and the first one is, well, what goes on in this business? So what are the tasks? What are the processes? What are the equipment and tools that being used? What are the areas, the environments that those activities are taking place in? And then I look at the legislation that applies to those tasks, to those pieces of equipment and processes that are in the business place. So what I try to do is I try to put it in a tabular form. I look at maybe a health and safety policy document, and within the policy document, in the arrangement segment or section, you will find a list of contents in there, and try and list those out. And then I break that down into the different various departments within the business, the office, the warehouse, work away maybe, or whatever's applicable. And where we have a crossover there, then we should have, it points you in the right direction, that we should have a risk assessment in place. And taking that a step further and trying to demonstrate that and the like, we all learn in different ways. I also like to try and demonstrate or create a schematic or a drawing, if you would, because I think, as it says, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And if I can put it in a diagram format, maybe it's a little bit easier to understand. So in this sort of example on the screen, we've got maybe some a metalworking factory fabrication. So we've got gas bottles, we've got guillotines, we've got bending machines, we've got drills, etc. We've got the raw materials, we've got lifting plant, forklift truck. We've got a whole host of hand tools and personal protective equipment. We've got the building itself with roller shutter doors. And obviously we've got a yard area for delivery and dispatch. So once I've created my visual diagram or schematic, and then again, I can then overlay all the different tasks and the different sort of pieces of legislation that might apply to those activities, etc. So that's how I start to try and build up my risk assessment piece. What I want to move on to next, in terms of the risk assessment, there are a number of I call them definitions that we need to think about. And the first one is hazard. So in my mind, a hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm. And this can come from anything from housekeeping right the way through to a specific piece of machine that's being used, or an activity or a task that's taken place. And if anything that is harmful in any way, then it could be classed as a hazard, I think. And hazards usually fall under 6 broad headings, and the 6 headings are on the screen there. So that's mechanical, physical, chemical, biological, environmental, and the organizational. So that could be a work procedure, that traffic management, etc. In those. So those are the 6 broad headings. And for that hazard to cause harm, an event must take place. A hazardous event must take place. So if I move the scenario to maybe a pothole, and we've got a whole pothole in the car park, etc. For that hazard to cause harm, somebody has to walk over and trip in that pothole. So that event has now taken place, and that event has 2 strands to it. One being the likelihood, so that's the chance of it actually happening, and the other being the consequence or the severity of injury. So if we have our pothole in the car park, in the corner of the car park, where not many people walk, then maybe the chance or the likelihood is somewhat reduced of somebody tripping up there. But if we lift that pothole and take it and we put it on the maybe down on Oxford Street in London, then because of the exposure and the footfall, then we've got a higher likelihood, a greater chance that somebody will encounter that hazard and trip and fall and the like. And similarly with the consequence, it's sort of the severity of the injury from minor right up to sort of I'll put it in catastrophic, maybe fatal. But we can come on to that. I'll try and demonstrate that as we move forward. So as I said, likelihood is the chance that somebody will fall down or trip up in the pothole bit, and the consequence is the outcome of that hazardous event. Sometimes, as I say, it's referred to as the severity of injury. So to try and illustrate that a little bit further for you, if we think about, in this scenario, maybe a window cleaner, and the window cleaner has got a brand new ladder, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, the green ladder there. So the ladder is straight out of the packaging, and as we can see, the ladder is in good condition. It's got feet at the bottom. It can be tied in at the top. The rungs are not damaged. The stiles are not damaged. So the likelihood of falling off that ladder is somewhat reduced. But over time, as that ladder gets used and used, and maybe there's some damage to the ladder, and in the middle ladder, the amber one, we can see where we've got some bent rungs, and then further along, as we get to the end of the life of that ladder, and I hope it's been disposed of and not used by the time we get to that to this one, we can see that the likelihood of falling off that ladder, just because of the condition of the piece of equipment, is far greater. Then if we move to our consequence piece, we've still got the same three ladders. So we've got the brand new ladder out of the packaging, we've got the ladder sort of mid life cycle, and then the ladder at its end of its life cycle. If the window cleaner is only cleaning the windows at ground floor, then the consequence or the severity of injury might be minor or insignificant. Whereas if we was to clean the windows at the first floor, then we fall off each of those ladders, then the consequence again, the severity might increase. So therefore we might class that as a medium. And if we're up at the second floor, then obviously falling off, then we're talking major broken bones, catastrophe, etc. So the consequence is high. And if we overlay those two matrices, if you would, those two tables, so that's the likelihood and the consequence, you can see how we start to develop our risk score matrix. And on this case, we're in a sort of a 3x3 matrix. And then we can color code those, maybe reds, the ambers or yellows, and the greens. What I would tend to use, or what I tend to use, is a matrix which is on a 5x5 scale. That's sort of in my world, in the safety world, that's the one that we tend to use the most. It gives us sort of the right flexibility to plot things out in the various sort of degrees. So I would always advocate using a 5x5 matrix when trying to risk score the risk assessment itself. Now, looking at the likelihood or the consequence, using our 5x5 matrix, in the top two tables there, I've gone from very likely to very unlikely, and again, it's just trying to slot in the different sort of factors, all levels in there, and similarly for consequence. From minor or insignificant, no injury, through to maybe fatalities up at number 5. So when we multiply where we are on our matrix, the figure that our result, if you would, then leaves us with sort of an action table. So if we're in our 1s and 2s, then no further action, but just ensure that the control measures that we've got are still maintained and still working, etc. But if we've come out that our risk rating is sort of in the higher figures, higher numbers, then it's a case of stopping and taking immediate action, and maybe trying to look at the job or the task and changing elements of it to try and reduce the risk. So maybe in our window cleaning scenario, if we'd have come out in the risk matrix that we're up in the red areas, let's not carry out that task. Let's stop. Let's think about it. Let's see what we can change. So rather than sending the person, the window cleaner, up the ladder, why don't we remove the ladder and provide a different piece of kit? So we give them the long pole with the brush on and the hose pipe, so that the window cleaner can remain at ground level, but he can still, or they can still clean the windows at the higher levels without the risk of actually falling. So we've changed the piece of equipment, and therefore we're reducing the risk. If we're in the ambers or the orange colours, then maybe think about putting in additional control measures. So we've got some control measures, not quite good enough. So let's put extra control measures in. So that might be in the form of safe systems of work, might be work instructions, might be additional training, etc. To help reduce that risk even further. And as I say, if our control measures are adequate, then we need to ensure that those control measures are suitable, sufficient, in place and working while that activity is taking place. So implementing the control measures, as I've said, so in our scenario, I'll give you the example where we've got our window cleaner. If we didn't want to provide them with the brush and the long pole, maybe we say that we're going to add in additional control measures to our risk assessment. So in this example, I've just put some additional control measures on the screen as bullet points here. Similarly on the next slide. So by adding these in and making it into a more substantial process for working with that task, then we're reducing the risk even further. Then once we've got our risk assessment in place and we've got our control measures, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999 say we have to do two things. One of them is that we make sure that we review our risk assessment on an annual basis or a frequent basis. And that means to make sure that that risk assessment is suitable and sufficient for the activity in that location. So, make sure that we've still got the same number of staff or the same type of staff when we carried out the risk assessment. They've not changed. Make sure we've not added in any new machinery or etc. or equipment that could change the risk. We could introduce other factors in there, or whether we've actually moved location. And also that piece of legislation, the Management of Health and Safety at Work regs, says that we've also got to monitor the control measures on a frequent basis. And it's a part or a small piece of legislation that seems to get lost or swamped within the annual review. So we need to carry out what we call a monitoring exercise to make sure that these control measures that we've put in place are used every time that task takes place. So to give you an example, this is just one way of laying out the risk assessment. So in the top box here, in the A1 bit, just a little bit of information. In A2, M2 boxes on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see we've got some hazards, and we've got our likelihood and consequence to give us our risk score, and in this case it's 15 in red. We then put in some control measures, and we could then maybe carry out and reiterate our risk matrix. So we've reduced the likelihood because of those control measures, and we've reduced the consequence because of those control measures. And now our risk matrix score is down in the greens at 4, etc. So just an example there of some of the ways that you can apply and use and display that information within your risk assessment template. So key summaries, key takeaways I would like you to think about. is to plan your approach when doing the risk assessments. So whether that's for yourself or whether you're supporting other people or your clients in business. So plan and approach. So that's the fact find piece, whether you do it in a tabular form against all the different departments and the activities, looking in the health and safety policy arrangements section, or whether you do that through a diagram or schematics. And then come up again, so it gives you the areas what you should be looking at. This then points out all the hazards, and then we can start to think about the consequences. Make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the definitions. So it's the hazard, and that's the potential to cause harm. It's the event piece. Somebody has to walk over that pothole, and then it's the likelihood and the consequence on the scales of 1 to 5. So we get our matrix. And then we go from very likely to unlikely and minor to fatalities on the consequence side. Plot out where we are on the risk matrix piece, and then try to implement the control measures in there. And then don't forget about sort of maintaining and monitoring those control measures within your risk assessment. So maybe that might be a monthly monitoring of the control measures, or every time that task is carried out. And then maybe the annual review of the risk assessment every 12 months, just to make sure nothing has completely changed. So hopefully those are the takeaways. That gives you something to think about in terms of the risk assessment process.